How's everybody doing? Great. I really appreciate everybody showing up this late on Tuesday before everything really gets going on Wednesday. But yeah, so thanks. Reminder to silence any noisemakers you have, and also to fill out your session review scorecards, whatever they're called, at the end of the session. Quick intro, just for people who don't know me or our team or anything like that. My name is Tim Train, CEO of Big Huge Games, the second incarnation of Big Huge. There was an original incarnation that I was also one of the founders of, and we kind of morphed through a lot of adventures to start the second version of Big Huge. Different personnel, different business model, and different culture, but still aiming for some of the greatness that the original Big Huge brought to the world. I've been in the games industry for 25 years now. I got amazingly lucky with getting a job working on the original Civilization right out of college. And I was a tester on that game, so I'm not claiming any great creative input or anything, but it was a really good first project, out of the industry, and it was kind of a really amazing thing and set me on this amazing, wonderful career whose latest chapter incarnation is DomiNations. Just a quick overview for the talk so people can decide if they want to stream for the exits now instead of later. This is geared a little bit towards novice free-to-play developers. In a lot of ways, this talk is coming out of conversations I keep having with AAA developers or people who maybe have done a free-to-play game but haven't really found the success they're looking for yet. And I've been struck by thematic similarities between those conversations that maybe want to address them in this talk. I'll quickly step through the development process on DomiNations because I think there's some interesting takeaways that are broadly useful to people. I'll talk about what our goals were for the project, our kind of hopes and dreams for how we would move the needle on mobile free-to-play games. I'll talk about interesting data that came back about our hopes and dreams that perhaps altered our view of reality somewhat. And then I'll talk about things that actually worked on the game. And all of that is in hopes that people listening to this won't have to, maybe risk their studio learning the exact same lessons that we learned to get DomiNations to where it is a sustainable game now that we hope is on a really good growth trajectory. Because for a while there, it was looking pretty dicey with DomiNations, and so I'll tell that story in graphs and charts and other fun infographics. And then I have a few just kind of soapboxy things to say at the end, and a comment about business model. This might be actually the most interesting thing for some people, but just some of the challenges for mobile indie third-party developers that really, I think people want to be thinking about what the ecosystem looks like a year, 2 years down the line. But that'll be the last thing when I can get worked up into a good froth without having to worry about sweating up on stage. Talk a little bit about the pillars of DomiNations. I think this is the project that was the most clear-cut for us starting right off. And these were actual pillars that we didn't exactly print them up in posters and put them up around the studio, but they really did inform the development of the game. We had them from the very beginning, and having this kind of framework for what we were trying to do was really, really useful. If you haven't played DomiNations, the elevator pitch for the game is very simple and very descriptive of the game. It's Clash of Clans meets Age of Empires, or alternatively Clash of Clans meets Civilization, depending on whose elevator you happen to be riding in when you're doing the pitching. And that's pretty much exactly what it turned out to be. Our top line goal was we want to be the Age of Empires for this generation of strategy games. We felt like that there's a big market out there for people who love world history games that wasn't being serviced at all, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Point number 2 is we wanted to be as different from Clash of Clans as Age of Empires was from Warcraft 2. And this was actually informed a lot of explicit conversations. We were kind of eyeballing what Age of Empires did was not really revolutionize RTS. They just were the next evolution of it in ways that were super cool. But under the hood, the core business model was very similar to Warcraft 2. And we kind of wanted to approximate that gap with DomiNations. Bullet point number 3, which came back to haunt us many times during live operations, was to be 20% more free than the competition. This wasn't a numerical formula that we applied to the game. It's not like all resources are 20% discounted or anything like that. It's mostly just that we wanted to have the player feel like we were just giving him more stuff while they're playing the game. And so, you know, systemically speaking, that was with hunting and gathering. You can now hunt animals, and that gives you bonus resources, and there's a little extra resources, or you can have troops return from battle in the game if you do well enough in battle. And so that again was something that we tried to kind of bake in throughout the whole game design. Another key point, on a scale of 1 to 10, if Clash is a 3 in complexity, we want to be a 4. The number of the complexity shall not be 5, 2 is right out, 3 is probably a bad idea, and 4 is right where we wanted to be. We felt that Clash had discovered this whole new audience of people that wanted a deeper strategy game on their mobile device, and they had done a really good job of teaching people the rules of this new system, so we could now advance things a little bit further, but we also didn't want to lose the audience by being too complicated, and with some regularity we killed features in the game that we thought were more fun, but that we knew when we went to usability and tried to get actual players to take a look at them, that turned out to be just too complicated for that audience, and so that was a key thing for us. Another thing, add meaningful choices. One of the Sid Meier rules for good game design is a series of interesting decisions, and so we tried to have actual meaningful choice in the game, like what nation you were going to be, which wonders to build, that were all mutually exclusive. And of course, we also wanted to follow the Sid Meier prototype method of game development that we think is really the only way to create great system-driven games like strategy games. The two big strategic questions for us starting out were Clash of Clans, is that Warcraft 2 or is it World of Warcraft? Warcraft 2 had discovered this whole new genre of games, or popularized it, or made it really broadly popular, and then it paved the way for a decade of other of these kinds of RTSs, of which Rise of Nations was one, which was a game that we had done at the original Big Huge, and Age of Empires, of course, was also in that mold. Or was it World of Warcraft, where World of Warcraft basically sucked all the oxygen out of an ecosystem for like a generation of games. You just couldn't put out a at least paid subscription MMO for years or ever after World of Warcraft. And then the second big question that kind of kept us up at night was, would somebody beat us to market with a world history game? And I'm still pretty shocked that nobody did, because again, we think that world history is great subject matter for a game. Talk just a little bit about this. This is just sort of a pet peeve of mine that, you know, every time we pitch a world history game, marketing departments, you know, seem to fret and wring their hands and talk about how, oh, history is such dry subject matter, you know, nobody really likes history, all that sort of thing. We actually think that world history is one of the very few broadly successful game genres that there is out there. We think that it's something that's really easy to teach people. They already kind of know what a catapult is and what cavalry is good for. You don't have to teach them, you know, what wizards are, what a nanoparticle emitter is if you're doing a science fiction game or something like that. And particularly because free-to-play on mobile requires this very broad funnel of users, ideally throughout the whole world. Like, that's part of the reason we all share kind of this common heritage of the history, that the legacy of mankind, and so really helps with the global appeal part of things. There's a classic story that when Civilization 2 was being developed, already having seen the big success of Civilization 1, the Microprose marketing department set their sales targets for Civilization 2 at 30,000 copies. They thought that Civ 2 would sell 30,000 copies, and that the 3DO version of Top Gun would be the big million-selling holiday season blockbuster or whatever, and we all know how well that worked out for both the Microprose marketing department and the Top Gun 3DO game. Civilization has obviously become one of the kind of pillar franchises in the industry, and so we are happy to prove the marketing guys wrong over and over again. I think world history contains all the great elements of an IP, characters, events, setting, and pre-existing knowledge that players already bring to the table when they play these games. And one key thing, this is just sort of the way we treat world history. A lot of people ask us if they think that our games are educational, and my kind of stock response to that now is that we don't really teach the facts of history, but we do teach a love of history, and I think that that is something that we can feel good about at the end of the day. If a kid is playing our game and likes Cleopatra as a general, and then it's time to go learn about the ancient Egyptians, and they have that kind of connection in the game, then that's great. That's as good as I hope to get in making the world a better place with our world history games. Just quickly step through the timeline of development. There's one thing in here that I feel like was a key learning, and it's not on this slide, it's on the next slide. We began in March of 2013, so almost exactly 3 years ago. Following that prototype method of design, we had our first playable up and running in 3 weeks. And we spent one good solid year prototyping before we went into the beta process. And the new thing that we feel like, I don't know, maybe this is something that a lot of people do, but I don't hear people talk about it, is this 30-30-30 beta. Like everybody does a friends and family where they kind of send out a broad invite, they try to get a bunch of players in, and that's cool, like we did that too. But 30-30-30 means that we find 30 people who commit to playing for 30 minutes a day for 30 days. And it's this process where you're basically dog-fooding your back-end services and trying to whip all those things into shape that you keep putting off because doing more gameplay prototyping is more interesting and cooler. And so the key part of that is actually finding 30 people that you can look in the eye and be like, so you're going to play 30 minutes a day for 30 days, right? If you can find those people, it's really, really useful, and it really helped inform the development of DomiNations. And we kind of think of it now as a best practice. Maybe if we'd had more mature tools and technology, which we should have on the next game that we do, then maybe it's less important, but really helpful for us. Had a friends and family, had a very long geo-lock where we were ironing out our technical issues and optimizing our product. Worldwide launch almost exactly 1 year ago in April 2015, and then we just recently announced last week that we are getting acquired by Nexon, who is our publishing partner for the product. So we're also very excited about that. But it's kind of this nice little arc of start with a concept, execute on the concept, and now feel like we have our future pretty well defined in terms of on the business side, and now we can just continue to make ever more interesting and innovative games. So that was the timeline of development. And all of that stuff is probably the boring preamble to the more interesting things that we thought were going to happen and how we kind of approach things. So these were what I just kind of call our wild-ass theories going into the game, because they weren't really based on data, much to the chagrin of our lead product manager, who is awesome and frequently pointed out that maybe we should think about finding more data before actually wrapping our design process around these wild-ass theories. But to hit these, the first one was that by modeling competitor economy, we could get close enough to the competitor results. We were looking at Clash of Clans, and we were like, wow, they're making like millions and millions of dollars a day with this game, and all we need are like one of those millions of dollars, and we would be completely fine, if we could do that. And so we thought, well, we don't need to supplant those games, we just need to capture enough of their audience. And we actually thought about our primary target for advertising user acquisition would be lapsed Clash of Clans players. That would actually be the largest pool of people that probably would have an affinity for this game. And we thought, okay, well, we'll model their economy, and hopefully we'll get close enough to their results to be perfectly happy as indie developers. We also intended to compete on price with them. If Marketing 101 teaches that one way you can think about market segmentation is you're competing on either price, features, or quality. We weren't going to compete with them on features because they had been out for years before we even started. So, okay, they had a lot of really cool features. That's cool. We did think that we could compete on quality of experience, and quality of user interface, the artwork, and on subject matter. But we also were trying to compete on price, explicitly, giving away more per unit of fun than the competition as we would describe it. We also thought that if we have a great game, that will attract more people to pay us less money, basically, that we wanted to have a broader payer base. We didn't really want to necessarily go chasing after the $1,000 spenders. We wanted people to kind of have, again, a broader payer base that we were basing the economy off of. And we also thought, finally, that systemic spend would account for the majority of our revenue. that we eyeballed Clash and other market leaders, and we were like, well, they don't really put out content that much, and yet they're at the top of the charts, and so most of their spend, their payer spend, must be coming from systemic content. And so these were our wild-ass theories. And now on to the fun charts. Actually, one more slide. So what actually happened was we had a great launch. The game has very high organics, which we like to think of as partly being because we made a really good game, but is probably largely due to the fact that there is no other world history game out there right now in the space. If you're looking for, what is an Age of Empires, what is a civilization, like, we're it. And so that means that we get very high organic ratio of paid to organic installs. We have really good retention. We're really happy with that. And I would maybe charitably describe our monetization as solid but not great. That's kind of the weakest part of the key metrics that there are in our game. And so that's something that nearly really had a big impact on the company. We also saw a lot of technical issues right out the gate, despite being in soft launch for like 6 months and applying lots of QA people, both internally and at our publisher. We just weren't prepared for scale, and that was just something that also came back to bite us in the ass a little bit later on. And so now, this chart is not exactly, Napoleon goes to Russia coolness of infographic, but it does do a really good job of telling the story of DomiNations. And so you can see that we had a pretty good launch there in the beginning in April. But you also notice a distinct downward trend line that didn't really get, nothing that we did reversed that at all with the features that we were trying to add. Complicated by those server outages that you see on that chart. I think a lot of people know this already, but we found out the hard way that when you have a server outage, like a major server outage that would be like an 8 to 10 hour, 12-hour server outage, you lose a percentage of your DAU that never comes back. They just give up and maybe just spitballing it, it's like 10%. You just lose 10% of your DAU that never come back. And so those server outages are just a really, really important thing to try to avoid. We released the Industrial Age, which added twice the amount of content to the game, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And that kind of reset where the sled ride was going to continue from, but we still continued the sled ride down. Then we had this phenomenal Asia launch that, again, hey, partly maybe it was a pretty good game, partly the world history as subject matter, but it was also due to our partner Nexon is just like a machine in Asia in particular, and they just did this phenomenal launch that has really, we're basically a bigger hit in Asia than we are in the West as a result of that, and so that has been really, really helpful as well. And then, but still we're on this sled ride down even after the cool Asia launch. And we discovered sales in there. We were like, hey, those are nice spiky parts of the graph where the sales are. I kind of wish we'd run those a little earlier just to see what they would have done. But okay, figured it out. But things didn't really start to change in terms of the long-term outlook for the game. We were kind of like, wow, 6 months from now, if we just trend line that out, like we're not going to be in a particularly good place as a company. The two features that we added that did change everything were first World War, which is basically an alliance war feature where you battle other alliances, and it's a great driver of retention because you don't want to be the guy that lets your clan down when the war is coming to an end. But then the second thing, and we'd heard from other people that this was actually really important, and we thought, well, it's probably kind of important. It's not that important. Were events. You can see all of these like call-outs for revenue spikes when we started launching weekly events that were things like, discount all troop upgrades by 25%, or complete these particular design goals, and you get a limited time Ninja Dojo or something like that that was really compelling and really got people engaged in the game and paying through content. And again, we were really, really surprised at how much that started to make us feel like we had found where the floor was for DomiNations. And the product people at Nexon talk a lot about trying to get the smile curve going, which is, you start here and then, you go down here, but then you start to actually be able to build your revenue back up again. And I'm hopeful that if I give this talk, at next year's GDC, that it'll be a nice, bright, dentist-approved smile after the features that we're trying to put into the game in 2016. So that's the story in a revenue infographic. This is the story in daily active users. And the most interesting thing about this, which you might note, is that the right side of the graph is your non-payer DAU, and the left side of your graph is your payer DAU. And again, this makes intuitive sense, but now here it is, data modeled. Is that your non-payer DAU just kind of declines over time, but the payer DAU, like basically if you've paid money in the game, the curve kind of flattens out, and the game retains payers a lot better than it retains non-payers. And at some point, you're always happy to have a really high DAU, and you're happy to have people playing your game, but at some point, the non-payer DAUs are kind of like, well, how much should we try to retain those people, target retain those people, as opposed to target retaining payers in the game? And so those are when you're trying to prioritize your feature set, that's something that informs that conversation. We pretty much hit these points already in the talk, but the key drivers so far of the turnaround have been to actually fix our technical issues, both the server outages and massive amounts of hacking that it turned out our game was susceptible to. We also added a lot more content to the game, which I'm going to break down in the next slide. Add more retention drivers, and as I mentioned, the events have really been paying the bills for us lately. So this is a slide that everybody should, if you don't know this already about the game that you're developing, you should go work it up. It's basically how much content is in your game if somebody just started from the very beginning and paid through, without waiting for any timers or waiting to collect any resources or anything like that. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, but we don't think that anybody's actually paid $21,000 to get through to the end of the game. So it's not like this translates directly into monetization, but it's a really good way to benchmark yourself against the competition. Like if you're like, hey, we're aiming for this particular business model, go figure out how much content they have in the game and whether your content roughly mirrors that or is more or less than what you're benchmarking. And the reason that's important is because of this chart, which shows the revenue by age. Basically, if you're paying us money in the industrial age versus the Enlightenment age versus gunpowder. And you can see that once we released the industrial age, this was this huge driver of revenue that basically anybody, the majority of the revenue was coming from the industrial age, or I guess the biggest slice, I should say, is coming from the industrial age. And so, that was really eye-opening for us as well in terms of, I guess people really are enjoying new content, and prioritizing getting new content into the game became a key piece of our roadmap. And again, this is something that a lot of people know intuitively, or they've kind of heard, but I'll be one of those people to try to quantify it, which is that most payers don't pay you anything in the game. I mean, most players don't pay anything at all. Industry standard talks about somewhere between 1.5% to 5% of your players ever pay you anything. Of the 1.5% to 5% of people that actually ever pay you, the vast majority of them only ever pay you a little bit of money, $1 to $20. And there are 1,000+ spenders out there who account for 1.35% of your payers of the 1.5% to 5%. So it's this very small amount of people that are paying you $1,000 or more. But they account for by far the biggest chunk of spend that you would actually see in the game. That those people, that tiny slice that are paying you $1,000 or more in the game, they're the ones generating over 33% of your revenue. People that are $100 and above are generating a very large chunk of your revenue, and people that are in the light payer realm are generating almost no meaningful revenue for you. Like it's like, okay, it's cool that they gave us some money. Like sure, I'll take an extra 7.58% revenue, but it's not really. When you're building your game and you're thinking about how to design your economy, just that's a really important thing to incorporate into your game. And this just shows the two of them together in nice handy charts. The biggest takeaway for me from all of this is if your game, so we have $20,000 worth of content in the game roughly. And that's basically not really enough content. Like we do not have enough content to be where we need to be for having a growing game. We have a stable game, and that's great. It took us a while to even get to a stable game, and so we're very happy and excited to be at stability. But if we want to grow, $20,000 worth of content is not enough, and much of the content that we're going to have to put in the game is going to be tailored towards people that are at the kind of far end of the payer spectrum. This is your payer buckets over the lifetime, and again, you can kind of see, the interesting thing to me is that if you're in the $1 to $20 bucket, you have way worse retention, like you just drop a lot over time, whereas the more you pay, the more stable the retention is. And again, that's a little bit intuitive, because if I invest a lot of money in your game, then I feel more like I want to continue to be part of that world. But it's something that is striking when you actually see it in graph form there. So another thing that we talked about in our wild ass theories was content versus systemic spend. That we had hoped that the majority, 50% or greater of our spend was going to come from come from systemic spend. And remember, systemic spend is basically repeatable. Content spend is stuff that you only pay for once. And so we have found that about 15 to 20% of our revenue comes from systemic spend, and that's been a pretty consistent number. Like, there's been a little bit of fluctuations, but we haven't meaningfully been able to move that, which has meant we've had to build out a content pipeline to feed that player desire. And this is content versus systemic spend over, just showing the actual relative revenue, so that you can see again that like what's really driving spikes or times when we see much improved revenue doesn't really depend on the systemic content. It really does depend on the new content that we put out. So let's see how our wild-ass theories turned out. By modeling competitor economy, we could get close enough to competitor results. False. We modeled our competitor economy, made it a little bit more free, but mostly modeled it, and we saw that we were not going to have a sustainable game if we just trend-lined it out over time. Compete on price. Let's be 20% more free than the competition. We had hoped that meant we would be able to get more people paying less amounts of money. It just turned out that we had the same amount of people paying us less amounts of money, and that turned out to be not so great as a business model. So yeah, that was point 3. And that systemic spend would account for the majority of our revenue. Also false. So all of our wild-ass theories where we really hoped, we talked about, we didn't really use the phrase, be the white hats of monetization or anything like that, but I hear a lot of people talking about that. And I just don't see a lot of evidence that at least the mobile ecosystem is set up for this kind of idealized picture that people think they might get, where they can get 15 to 20% of people paying in this ecosystem, and maybe they only pay us $10 a month. We don't want people paying thousands of dollars a month in the game, not a month, but thousands of dollars over the lifetime. And again, at least with our experience, this turned out not to be a very good way to run the game. So those were the lessons that we learned on the game. Just to hit a couple of soapbox points, and again, these are kind of informed by conversations with AAA developers. I'm always struck by how many times I have the same conversation where AAA developers or people that are new to this space just hate everything in the top 50. Like, they just all these games suck. Your players don't know why they're playing these games. Like, they clearly just don't know good design. And I basically, I think the rule of thumb should be that if you don't like any games in the top 50, then consider not making a mobile game, because you're not gonna have enough of a sense of what the players like or what the competition is doing to make a game that you're passionate about or that you can pour your passion into. I've taken to calling this the Elvis Presley syndrome, where a lot of times I'm in these conversations and I keep feeling like people are classical musicians being confronted with the rise of Elvis Presley. That everything that you think you knew about what makes good music is just being destroyed in at least this particular genre of rock music that was evolving by this guy who just does 3-chord songs, and they're all simple lyrics, and it's the dancing and everything, and this was why Elvis Presley was such a revolutionary figure at his time, because he just destroyed the notion of what made music be good, and an art form that had been dominant for centuries, just gave way to rock and roll over time. And I sometimes feel like, a lot of times designers are talking about how, well, they just don't know what good game design is, or they don't know, if only they could get into a Civilization or something like that, then that's what real good game design is. And a game like Clash of Clans or DomiNations or whatever, that's not real game design. And I think that's really dangerous for people to kind of adopt that mindset. I don't think it's very respectful of the player. I think that people know good and goddamn well what they're doing when they're spending thousands of dollars in the game. It's people that also spend thousands of dollars on their NFL season tickets, or Emily Greer gave a great talk that's up on the GDC Vault about Don't Call Them Whales, where she compared player spending habits in Congregate games to her spending habit as an ice skating enthusiast and an ice skating competitor. And so I really think that people should just, there's a condescension in how people a lot of times view mobile free-to-play games that I think is not warranted by actually talking to those players. The high-value player economy, I also don't like to call them whales. You have people that really are engaged with your game and give you a lot of money. We talk about them as high-value players in our game, and at least we found that at least right now in this mobile ecosystem, you do have to design for high-value players. That's not the only thing you're designing for. It's great to have millions of people play your game. Nexon announced a while ago that we had 19 million downloads on this game, when back in the day, Civilization 1 might have sold, maybe it cracked 2 million copies or something like that, the first one, and that's the power of free-to-play. It's really, really cool that close to 20 million people have gotten to play in this sandbox of world history, whereas in the old days, 2 million units was the most that you could ever dream of for a title like that. So yeah, it's great to have high DAU, a lot of people in your game, but if you're not designing from the ground up to have tens and tens of thousands of dollars of purchasable content in your game, at least with these kind of strategy games, you're probably not going to be successful. And this brings me to the last point of this, which is that I think part of the reason why you need tens of thousands of dollars of content is because the current indie third-party mobile business development model is very, very challenging right now, and it's going to get more challenging over the next couple of years. And let me just break that down. So third-party is, you are an independent, published by a publisher. On mobile, where the user acquisition channels are relatively constrained and therefore valuable and therefore expensive, and if you are indie, meaning you're not your own publisher, all those things combined for this storm where if you're Supercell and you're perfectly happy with a 30% ROI on your user acquisition investment, but if you're a publisher working with an indie and you have to pay the indie a 30% royalty, then you're already at a 0% ROI if you're that publisher. And that's where user acquisition costs are currently. But if you look at the trend line on user acquisition costs and you chart that out over the next couple of years, it's just going to get really, really hard to be able to buy users at scale. If DomiNations hadn't had that high organic number, where I think there were a lot of people looking for world history games, I think we really would have been in a really difficult place, because we just aren't able to buy users profitably, even with our tens and tens of thousands of dollars of content in the game. Maybe tens and tens. There's two tens, $20,000 of content in the game. We basically aren't able to buy a lot of users profitably, because the more users you buy, the more expensive they get. And so that was one of the reasons at a strategic level why we decided to pursue an acquisition with Nexon, partly because we really loved working with them, and I think that they've been a great partner for us. And again, the strong U.S. Western launch and then the just crazy Asia launch is proof in the pudding of that. But when we looked at Game 2 and we looked at, well, what are our options for Game 2, we can continue as we are, but we're probably going to end up being unprofitable to acquire users with, given the rise of costs. we could get out of the business of being a third party, meaning we could build our own publishing org, but I sort of looked dark into my soul and was like, I don't think I can do that. I don't want to do it. I want to make games. And so, that didn't sound like a very compelling thing to do. Or we could get out of being indie. And so that was basically the path that we took, was let's align incentives for future growth and future development. Let's get out of business development and let's get back into just focusing solely and exclusively on making games, which is what our studio was founded to do. And so that was, again, at one of the major considerations for why we chose to partner up with Nexon for the long haul. So again, if you're part of an indie mobile third-party studio, just think long and hard about what this world looks like 2 years from now, because I think it's just gonna keep getting more and more difficult unless you come up with some massive monetization strategy that's totally radical and different and new, but is still probably going to require you to rely on that high-value player economy. And that is pretty much all. I think I talked a little too fast and got through the main pieces of content a little too quickly, so I'll go to my fun facts section, which is just more fun with data. These are the nation selection in the game right now, what the actual percentage of people picking different nations are. And there's a couple of things that I think are interesting. So the conventional wisdom right now is that the best PvP nations in the game are Korea and Rome, and the best kind of turtle empire builder nations are Japan and Greece. And so that's because of the different powers that the nations have. And so it's interesting to me to see that as a percentage of DAU that, most people are not doing hardcore competitive PvP, because if you are, you would have switched your nation to Korea or Rome. But people are still hanging out in kind of the empire builder section of things. But then that also leads into an interesting thing, which you can kind of roughly gauge the patriotism of different nations by how, if you live in a nation, what percentage of the people in that nation choose to play that nation. And none of this is necessarily particularly actionable, other than maybe we should add an American nation or something like that. But you find that all the different spreadsheets that the Germans are the least patriotic people in the world, apparently, for whatever reason, and China and Greece and Korea are up there with the most patriotic nations. So again, not really anything that's actionable, but it's part of what I love about this whole era of data in games, is you can just kind of find interesting, fun, completely meaningless correlations that you can put at the end of your talk when you've talked too fast to get to the end of time. So that is all that I've got to say, but I'm perfectly happy to answer questions about DomiNations or anything else, ecosystem, our experience as an indie dev. So approach the mic.
Howdy.
Hey.
So I really resonated with a lot of the wild ass theories, and so I'm a bit bummed that it didn't quite play the way you guys had planned. So I'm curious on a couple notes. Do you think that there's opportunity to grow that systemic spend in terms of just having that lower base of continually paying players? Like, do you think there is a model there for you guys to get off the ground? Because you said that that's been pretty flat.
Yeah, so our very first content release was Oil Boom, which added a more scarce resource to the economy, sort of the dark elixir if you're a Clash player. And the Industrial Age in particular added a lot of really cool new toys that were oil-based. And we had hoped and designed that to be like, hey, let's try to get repeatable systemic spend up. But even airplanes and tanks and zeppelins and things like that didn't really seem to move the needle very much. The people that were already spending a lot of money continued to spend a lot of money, but it didn't really change that mix of systemic versus content. And so, which is one of the reasons why, we're focusing a little more on content as we look at what our roadmap looks like for 2016.
Cool. And I guess I'm cheating by asking another one, but Do you think, is there anything different, and I haven't seen these graphs for Hearthstone, do you think there's anything different in their model? Like, I guess it's purely systemic spend, but do you think there's anything different there, or?
Well, I would consider Hearthstone to be purely content spend because it's all about the cards. And so none of that is necessarily, repeatable spend in that way. They just have to keep producing more cards, and you see them spike on their top grossing charts every time they release new card packs. There are a couple things that are different about Hearthstone. One of them is that they're a multi-platform game, right? So I think they intentionally target PC users on the user acquisition side, and then try to migrate them to mobile, where the gameplay experience is I think it's maybe a little better, a little more convenient at least. But you can acquire users more cheaply on the PC, and there's more vectors to acquire them. Like, it's not just all about Facebook ads or the 30 ad partners that you might have. And the PC audience is also more heavily engaged, so they're more willing to seek out cool things. And also, if you're Blizzard and you have this phenomenal IP, I mean, not to take anything away from them, because I think Hearthstone's an amazing game and I love it to death. But it's a lot easier if you're Blizzard to acquire users cheaply, so you don't have to play that UA LTV arbitrage game quite as much.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Go over to the other mic.
Hi, great talk. You had the revenue graph up there, and there were like 3 components. I think it was crowns, which is your hard currency. Then you also had like starter packs, and I think promo packs was the other one.
Yes.
I noticed that the percentage was, there it is. Your big sales spike seems to only correspond with crowns. What pricing opportunities did you guys do with the starter packs? I bought the starter pack in the game, and
Sweet.
Do you think what tuning did you do, and did you notice any sort of translation of people buying those packs into either content or systemic spend later on?
Right, so that is a great question. We did not do sufficient A/B testing on the starter pack. We probably left a decent amount of money on the table by pricing it a little bit too low, or maybe we didn't price it too low, but we gave away too many crowns for free with it. Like, the real value of it is the house in the starter pack, and so we wish that we'd done more A/B testing when we were in soft launch to really establish that. So. Yeah, too bad for us. Do more A/B testing. Back to the other mic.
Hi. So what exactly happened with that Asia launch? It's a different SKU, right? DomiNations Asia. Is that managed by Nexon? Is it a volume thing with their distribution network? Or is it tuning that's different? Was it the Korea nation that was introduced that really, because that's like explosive growth right there.
Right, yeah, we were like, wow, that's really explosive growth right there. So yes, we were really happy about it. The game is the exact same game. All players play in the same pool. We manage the game the same. Like, it's all run out of Baltimore. It's not, there's nothing that's made. Like, Nexon Korea gives us really valuable feedback about, hey, what's the player ecosystem saying? What's community sentiment like? All that sort of thing. And they may make a request for features. They're like, hey, maybe we should try this feature. But the game is managed and run out of Baltimore. So yeah, I mean, they're really good at marketing. I mean, they've been around for 20 years. They pioneered the free-to-play business model. They really understand their audience. We were like having bus ads. We had Korean rappers on YouTube like rapping about DomiNations, which is one of the more surreal advertising experiences I've been part of. I should have brought that stuff, but anyway, it was next talk. And so yeah, they just did a really, really good job. I think it's a market where it's easier to reach everyone in the ecosystem. Like, we basically hit a saturation point in Korea in particular, where basically every single person in your primary target demographic had installed the game, which we don't think we're at yet in America or the West, partly because it's a much more diffuse ecosystem and it's hard to kind of get that message out. Like, I think if 10% of Clash of Clans players had even heard of our game, I would be surprised and happy, but in theory that's a lot of room to run on trying to get more people to try what is basically what we view as a kind of evolutionary step over the Clash business model.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Next.
Thank you so much for the talk. Do you mind elaborating a little bit more on the live ops? Like, what were some of the things that you do for your live ops, and how did they work out? Stuff that worked, stuff that didn't work, and how did it kind of complement each other? Sure,
yeah. So we run. I mean, the entire studio right now is deployed on live ops. And so we have a roadmap meeting every week where we kind of look at what features we could put into the game. We look at our numbers and see, well, what do we think is actually the most important thing? And we kind of reorder those with regularity as we get new data in on what people are actually engaging with in the game. We have an events team that's made up of a lot of really awesome, passionate junior designers engineers who it's a phenomenal first kind of design job in the industry to just be like, hey, go make events for a month, go figure out what the prizes will be, go figure out, use data to inform what the goals should be. Like it's a really good way to get people up and running on how data should inform your game design. And so, when we set our targets, like if we're doing a PvP event, we're like, well, what can 80% of players complete, sort of the entry-level goal, and at the bottom end of it, maybe it's only 10% of players could complete it if they were, fully engaged in the game. And so it's a really fun process, I think, for people to do those kind of events. So yeah, there's new features in the big releases, new ages. We do want to tell the entire story of mankind from the Stone Age to the Space Age. And so that will continue to be the big heartbeat releases on the game. And then the event system is kind of filling in the gaps there. Great. Over there.
Yeah, just have you mentioned that you started with 10 people when you're prototyping.
Yes.
Can you maybe say how many people you had at each phase, maybe for soft launch today, and then roughly what is the split between artists or content producers and engineers?
Great. Yeah. So in the beginning, what did we have? We had 3 artists, 4 programmers, a data analyst, and me and Brian. And so that was kind of the split. We started with maybe a bigger team, and there's a mildly interesting story in this, where this was another area where we just got super, super lucky because so our team had founded Big Huge, or parts of our team had founded Big Huge, the original. That had gone through the Kurt Schilling debacle, if anybody remembers the 38 Studios shenanigans, and so had eventually gotten shut down. The core of that team was picked up by Epic, who then shut it down 3 weeks before Zynga East, which was the studio that we had been working at for Zynga, got shut down. So we basically had 10 people, we had 110 people in the Baltimore area that were all out of work on at least 3 months of severance, who could just start working the next day. So we basically were like, hey, here's some of the people that we'd really want to work with. And I like to say that our angel round of funding came courtesy of Mark Pincus and Tim Sweeney. So thanks, guys. Appreciate that. And by the time that the severance started to run out, we were able to get our deal with Nexon signed up. And so that was really, really lucky for us. We did most of the game with about 20 people, maybe 18 to 22 when we really entered into hardcore production. And we're currently 42 people with, I think it's 12 programmers, 5 artists, 5 designers, and then a mix of production, back-end, office, that sort of thing. Over there.
Hi, Tim.
Hey.
I think the 2 different monetization models between your style of game in Clash of Clans versus Game of War and Clash of Kings, where there's inflation in one and there's non-inflation in another one, is really interesting. And I'm curious if you ever had that debate with yourself, because when I see these sales, I wonder, why don't you do more sales? And I wonder if that, as you slightly inflated the packs, if you would get more consistent and higher revenue.
Yeah, those are really good points. And when we think about a game like Game of War and whether we want to try to adapt some of their business model, what stands out to us is that they have, I think if you just didn't buy anything in the game but just did free upgrades over time, I think the stat is it would take you 652 years to actually get through all of the content in Game of War, which is just a totally different mindset and monetization model than what we're in. We do think that it would be nice if we could have more sales. The problem is we at least haven't figured out how to get enough systemic spend to sink those crowns. Like basically, if you inject those crowns into the economy, the premium currency, you need some way to take them out or your sales stop working because people are like, I already got 50,000 crowns. Why do I need any more crowns? With systemic spend, and this is one of the reasons why we're sad that systemic spend didn't work out more, we could do more sales because it's repeatable sinks of spend. And maybe eventually we'll figure out how to do that. And my GDC 2017 talk can be all about how we cracked that, but we just don't have the sinks to soak up those crowns if we injected them into the economy.
So the time frame of when you start the next sale is when the amount of crowns in the economy goes to a certain level? Well,
we aren't quite as data-driven about that as maybe we should be, or as our lead product manager would like us to be, and that's a good thing for her to champion. We've kind of been a little bit like, oh, it's Christmas, time for a sale. It's Lunar New Year, time for a sale. And so sooner or later, we should probably get more product-driven on that. We haven't frankly, spent a lot of time trying to optimize our sales.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, over there. How much time do we have? We got 10 minutes. Good, plenty of time.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. So you saw nation selection graph.
Yes.
In that graph, and Japan is the largest one. So I came from Japan. So please, do you know why Japanese most largest selection?
I think it's because so especially in world history games, this is just a thing that is a little bit anecdotal, but we feel like has been seen a lot over time. People really like to build their empire. And so the Japanese, their powers are really good at defending against attacks. And so people that want to turtle in old RTS parlance, like they don't really want to fight very much. They just kind of want to, build a really cool empire. The Japanese powers are suited for that. And we were trying to kind of draw on Japan's history as a country that was really good at keeping its isolation and its independence intact, even in the era of colonization and things like that. So we think it's just that their powers are really good at a style that a lot of people want to play in world history games.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for your presentation. I think it's very cool to go in and to see all of this data laid out sort of in one place. I'm wondering. Two questions. So the first one is, what do you use for your in-app analytics? Mm-hmm. And the second is, what tools would you recommend to go in and to do the entire funnel management from ad purchase all the way through to sort of user conversion?
Right. So some of that, I would be happy to put you in touch with the right person to actually dive deep on that. But we use our custom in-house analytics solution that we built over time with Nexon. And so, we're not using any off-the-shelf technology that way. But maybe for game 2, we would think about it. It's not a thing that I personally have researched a lot. But take my email, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with somebody who might have done more of that. Yep. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks a lot for hanging around, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.